Big shout out to you for making it through the hectic holiday season. This new year, get clean, quality pregnancy nutrient support off your to-do list, including Ritual's best-selling Essential Prenatal Multivitamin, designed with 12 traceable key ingredients to support a healthy pregnancy. With big changes coming up, take the small steps now and start today with 30% off a 3-month supply at ritual.com/podcast. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. At Ritual, we know what goes into a magical holiday season: the potluck planning, the gift giving, the spreadsheets. This new year, take a moment for yourself with simple daily rituals that help you put your foundational health at the top of your to-do list. Ritual's Essential for Women 18 Plus multivitamin is a clinically backed multivitamin featuring 9 high-quality key essential ingredients to help you fill key nutrient gaps in your diet. Or maybe you're stressing your daily protein intake, or you want to double down on support for your gut microbiome. From plant-based essential protein to 3-in-1 pre, pro, and postbiotic strains with Symbiotic Plus, Ritual helps you focus on supporting your body after a long season of juggling everybody else. And for a limited time, do it with 30% off a 3-month supply at ritual.com/podcast. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
All right, everyone, and welcome back to the Happily Never After show. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Today we have a special episode. My co-host, unfortunately, was unavailable, but filling in for him, I do have a very dear friend of mine and fellow widow, Shawn. Thank you so much for being here with us. I appreciate you filling in last minute.
Yeah, of course. Happy to join you.
Happy to be here on the Happily Never After show, she says. I love it. So, Shawn, why don't you give the listeners just a brief background about you, about your journey, if you'd like, and about what you've got going on now.
Yeah, of course. So as Kate told you, my name is Shawn. I lost my fiance in 2022 to an overdose. I was 31 at the time, and I was 1 month out before our wedding was supposed to be. So just a total shift in life after that, obviously. And so I've just been trying to navigate through grief since then, and that led me to journaling, which then led me to my business, which is Heartstrings Journals. I have a bunch of different journals. I think there's 45 plus journals on Amazon at this point.
Wow.
And it started all from my journaling. So a grief coach recommended it to me. I didn't know what the heck to do. And so I started journaling. I started writing letters, and I started writing lists of the good and the bad from my day. And so that's how most of my journals are set up. And it's just a really impactful therapeutic tool that helps me get all my stress and anxiety and the pressure out of my chest and get to put it somewhere else on a journal.
I love that. Definitely moving grief out of your body and onto something tangible. And whether you do something with it or not, it's just moving it out of your body is so important and super underrated, I feel like. So thank you for sharing that gift and that perspective with the rest of the grieving world. And I know personally for me, when I think about the loss journey that I've been through and widowhood and all of that good stuff, there comes a point where I just have so much on my mind. So having journaling is a really great way, or even just making lists, like you said, is a really great way to help clear the noise. And one of the things I find myself writing frequently is the things that I'm afraid of, like fears that I have, whether they be silly and arbitrary. I'm much more of a hypochondriac now, or whether they be fears of not meeting goals or deadlines, and even to a degree, writing lists is all fear driven for me. Hashtag OCD, if you know, you know. If we think about the fears that we have after having that type of loss, what are some of the things that you found that you're afraid of or that you find fearful?
Yeah. So for me, I don't know that I necessarily would call it fear, because to me, fear is like jumping out of an airplane or something like really scary. My fears now are things that like build up stress and anxiety before the event. So it's like if a birthday is coming up or if a wedding is coming up, and those events that I know are going to cause that spike in my grief where I'm going to be like in a dark place for a little minute because of those things, and not and having lost those things from my life. I think those things cause me what I would contribute to or attribute to fear now.
Interesting. So it's like that bracing for impact. You find that you're more afraid of how you're going to respond, or if you're prepared well enough for the response, or both
Yeah.
or neither.
Well, I think that like I'm sure you know, like when the event first happened, when you lost your person, you go into this really dark place and you try like hell to climb out of it. So anything that's going to possibly trigger you to be back there is scary because you don't know how long it's going to last this time. And
Yeah,
I
that's
think the more work you do, the easier it becomes, but it's still like just the unknown.
it's almost like a PTSD response, not just for the loss, but for the deep throes of grief, right? Like that
Absolutely.
remembering how painful it was. It's, that's why we say we forget about childbirth. It's because if we could remember how painful it was, we probably wouldn't do it again. And I feel like we don't have that luxury with grief sometimes. We don't forget how painful and how intense it can be. In fact, we remember it, and that is very scary. You're right. Um, is there anything you find now, having lost John, that are afraid of that you weren't afraid of before?
It's probably the opposite for me, honestly. I'm probably afraid of less
Yeah.
because in my mind, it's kind of like the worst thing possible happened to me. So how bad can this thing really be? Like I talk a lot about how I used to be so introverted and quiet and shy, and now like if I tell people that, they're like, "What do you mean? You're just talking to like a room full of strangers, or I go on vacations by myself and things like that." And so to me, it's like a comparison. What could be worse than what has already happened?
I love that you have that very alchemistic kind of do it yourself philosophy. You're very like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that wherewithal to just say, well, the worst has already happened. And I feel like that's not always a common mindset or takeaway from this type of loss. How do you find yourself there? Is that just part of your innate personality, or was there something that you did that helped you get to that mindset?
Well, I think I am very conscious of my mindset and I work hard to make it be a positive mindset because John passed from an overdose. So
Mm.
everything that happened around me during that time was very chaotic. And I had to put myself in a headspace while it was happening up until after he passed that this is all happening to me. It's not happening because of me. I didn't do anything to bring this upon myself. And really, neither did he. Like, addiction was in his family. So it was innate in him. And so I just try to think of things from a different perspective. And instead of dwelling, I want to push forward. Even with my journal business, I am determined to turn this tragedy of losing my fiance into something that is good and will hopefully help other people who may be struggling in similar ways.
You're such an
But it's a very
incredible.
conscious thing that I have to do. Like, it's not just easy.
Oh, totally. Oh, totally. And that's what makes it so incredible that you're doing the things that you're doing, and just one widow to another. Like, I'm super proud of you. I'm super impressed by you because it's not easy, right? Like, we as women in general kind of are put in this mindset where we're just the doers, we're just the keepers, we're expected to very much that Margot Robbie speech from Barbie, for those of you who saw it. We are held to so many high standards. And when stuff does go sideways, when we become unraveled, we're still expected to be very poised or be, that damsel in distress. But you've really found self-driven empowerment from this tragedy. And I know I didn't know John, but I can tell you that I'm sure he'd be so incredibly proud of you. Um, And I'm sure there are days for you that are still struggles, right? Like those days, you find yourself afraid of missing out on things that you weren't going to get to experience. You find yourself afraid maybe of not being good enough, capable enough. I know certainly for me, starting my own business, I have imposter syndrome like nobody's business. But grief actually amplified that for me. And I was very surprised to learn that. Do you find something similar?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing that I also do that's like a conscious decision is I call it like my times that I find to make myself sad. So if I know like that something's coming up, I will kind of allow myself that grace and that time to go. Maybe I'll go to the cemetery and I'll sit there and I know that that's going to be sad, but also that gives me that release before something coming up that's going to be hard. And so I find that consciously sitting in my feelings, even though I know that they're going to be sad ones, then allows that new space for me to like refill my cup back up to that sadness level, if that makes any sense.
It's a muscle, right? Grief is a muscle. We have to stretch it and practice it and utilize it because losing your spouse is like the grief Olympics, you know?
Yeah.
And not to say that, grief of losing a spouse is better or worse than any other type of grief. I can't even begin to imagine what it's like to lose a child or a sibling or a parent, but it's apples to oranges and they all live in the same produce department, right? Like we are adjacent to one another. And each one is different in its own way, which is also bizarre to me. Scarily similar, but very unique and different. As I think about how we move through grief, especially now that you're as far out as you are, do you find that there are things you were afraid of closer to his loss that you're not afraid of anymore, or vice versa?
Um, so for me, I think it would be anything relating to potentially a new relationship. Um, Especially because of again the addiction piece.
Mm,
My ability to trust and my ability to trust my own intuition about things is very off now because addiction comes with a lot of lying. And so I'm a very innately trusting person, empathetic person. So if someone's telling me something, I'm inclined to believe them. And I went through a very long period of being lied to. So that makes my ability to trust not only romantic relationships, but like friendships or any new people that are coming into my world. I like seriously have to kind of evaluate them myself and make sure that this is a good relationship for me, that I can trust them, that it's someone worth bringing into my circle.
mm. That's an interesting perspective. I don't think I would have looked at it that way. And addiction is no joke, man. It's a disease. So I'm so sorry that John went through that and that you went through that. And you're right. There's a deception that comes with it, with any ailment per se. I know for me, I find myself terribly afraid of medical facilities, of adverse health things. It's an interesting concept because all of the people in my circle, I'm nagging them constantly to like go to the doctor or do their regular checkups. But when it comes to me, the last time I was in a emergency room situation was when Craig passed away. So I have this aversion to hospital settings and medical facilities. And do you find that there's situational things for you that cause fear or anxiety or bring up that grief episode in you?
Um, well, I mean, again, kind of back to the trust thing and what you were saying about the going to the doctor. It's not necessarily me going to my physician for a physical or something like that that gives me anxiety. It's not being able to, again, trust the medical professionals that are going to provide the most help because before John passed, I was trying like hell to find him any kind of help and support, and it just wasn't readily available in the emergency situation that I was experiencing.
Mm,
So I would go into a clinic that is meant to help people struggling with addiction, and they would send us away with like a 1-800 number to call, and it was just a disaster. So having faith in like the people that are supposed to be the helpers is much more difficult now, and to trust
mm,
that they're actually doing something to help and not just to. I think a lot of us now are skeptical of the medical system, that it's just for making money. It's not actually for helping people. And so it's just a spectrum of things. And Yeah, the trust is big for me, and then the fear of the unknown is really big for me. It's
Fear
not
of
so
the
much a situational thing where I get in a car and I'm scared, or I go into somewhere and I'm scared. It's that anxiety that builds within myself, but I get
sure.
scared of that potentially getting bigger or getting worse.
Do you find that you like hype yourself up with your fear? Like it may not be that big of a deal, but you ruminate on it and then the fear becomes more pressing for you?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm totally the same way. I'm my own worst enemy. Sometimes I just have to shut up and get out of my own way.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing too. Like when I said I go on these travel trips that are solo travel trips, and I was so scared the first time I went on one because I'm not going there really alone, but I'm going to meet up with other solo travelers. So they're people I don't know, and that's scary and intimidating. But again, I kind of have to shift my mindset back to, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? The worst has already happened to me. So say one of these people on this trip, I don't get along with them. Like, is that really the end of the world if they don't like me or if I say something silly? Like, I used to be so in my head about everything that I thought people were perceiving about me. And now that's
Mm.
kind of gone away because that's the least of my worries anymore.
Isn't it interesting how like such an intrinsic loss gives us perspective about those otherwise menial things, right? Like I certainly have found that perspective has been the greatest gift, but also my biggest fear. The perspective of once you know something, you can't unknow it. And I know that I have family history of certain cancers and whatnot. I went and did like genetic testing after he passed because I was like, I need to know everything and I panicked. And now I'm like hyper vigilant about those risk factors and those things. And it's almost sometimes it's better not knowing, but then that fear of unknown, it becomes very cyclical and we get trapped in this OODA loop of grief responses and they work against each other and like navigating a maze that's a house of mirrors, right? You find that that's a similar experience sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the scariest parts too is like, so I lost the person that I considered my person, like the most important person. That was my emergency contact. That was who I would tell about my day, like my everyday person. And so
Mm.
now one of my greatest fears is losing the next person after them, which would be my mom. So that is a very scary thing because obviously our moms get older and like things happen, but that's a terrifying idea to me that I would lose her and also not have him either.
Wow. Yeah. I think I think that you bring up a really great point. For me, it actually was easier when I started thinking about, because my parents are older, not super old, but older, and our parents are going to die eventually. But for me, it was almost easier because now I knew what to expect in a way, because I've been through funerals, God, since I was a small child, very small child, and it's different when it's yours, when it's directly connected to you. And so
Yeah.
now I'm like, all right, like the next one will be a little bit easier because I've already been through this trial by fire. But that not having that person to lean on when you have this next loss is a way I didn't think about thinking of it.
Yeah. Well, so
What are
I'm
some
33 years old. I still talk to my mom every day, all day. She takes care of me like I am a little child. And so if I just lost her, she's my rock. And I don't know, I would I would probably be worse, honestly, than when I lost John, because it was almost like I had that for a little while, but she's been a constant in my life forever. So I've never not had her. I did not have him at some
at
point.
one? Sure. No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I can. Wow, that's well, Mother's Day is coming up, so shout out to your mom. Shout out to Shawn's mom. I love that. Happy Mother's Day to her and to all the other moms out there who are listening. What are some of the ways that you mitigate your fears when you find that you're having a fearful moment or an anxiety driven grief attack? What are some of the ways you tackle that?
Well, so definitely journaling. Again, if I ever start feeling any weirdness in my body, I start to write in my journal because that for me is the way that I don't always necessarily know what's causing that feeling or that weirdness, but sometimes writing out like brings out new ideas that you didn't necessarily think about in your head until you put that pen to the paper. So I feel like journaling is a useful tool in so many different ways, whether it's consciously or unconsciously uncovering what's going on inside of us.
I love that. I think that, for me personally, as a writer, I find journaling to be very challenging, which has always been curious to me. What are some ways that you prompt yourself to get started? Like, what are some of the things that you write about?
Yeah, so I really like writing letters. So I have actually one of my journals is called Letters to Our Loved Ones. And so that's what I keep in my glove box. So when I go to the cemetery or if I need to talk to John, I specifically write in that one journal and I will write him letters like as if I was talking to him on the phone or as if I was talking to him next to me on the couch. So I really like to write letters. And it could be anyone, like it didn't have to be John. I could write it to my grandma who's passed away, or I could write it to someone that's alive. It doesn't have to be someone that's passed away. But I feel like having that conversation, but not getting the feedback from the other person is sometimes helpful in itself because we don't always want advice. And that's what people are inclined to give us when we're venting about something. So it's like a one-sided conversation, but it lets you work out your own thoughts without the intrusion of anyone else's.
That's so, so true that people love to just give advice, even when it's not necessarily needed. We have an innate responsibility and desire to fix people. So I always try to be in the habit of, would you like support or would you like advice when I'm listening to someone? So I
Yeah.
love that you touched on that. So your journals are really unique and customizable to each person. I know you have some blank ones, but then you have some ones that have prompting in them. Talk to me about how you leverage the different kinds of journals for your grief experience.
Yeah. So, like I said, the letters was the one that kind of kicked it all off for me, and that's pretty self-explanatory. The A lot of the other ones are set up for lists, so it's got a section to write the good parts of your day, the bad parts of your day, and then there's an other section. So if you have anything in between or anything extra you want to get out, you can write it in there. That I that's how I was journaling when I first started. And I just got tired of writing the little prompt for myself every day. So I just printed it out and it eventually became into my business. But that one's good for just every day at the end of the day, an easy way to kind of brain dump. You don't have to look at a blank page and think about what you're going to write today. It's already set up for you. And it's also a gratitude practice, right? So you have to put at least, I always say you have to put 1 to 3 things in that good section. And I don't care if it's like my puppy that I'm potty training went outside today and went to the bathroom, or my coffee at Dunkin' Donuts was good today and didn't taste like crap. Like, it can be these little tiny insignificant moments. They don't have to be big revelation, great things, but just making sure you have something that you're pushing your awareness onto something positive that did happen to you, and not everything in your entire day was bad, even though that's sometimes how we feel, especially during intense grief. um but yeah, and then I find that that setup in itself is also a gratitude practice, and you can look back onto how far you've come. So you can see 1 month ago I had only one thing for the whole week that was good, and then now I have a whole list of good things and maybe only a few bad things. So you can kind of see your fluctuations and how you've kind of transformed over a period of time. And that
I love
reflection shows you that you've made
I love
progress.
it's such an important thing, first of all, to celebrate the little milestones, right?
Yes.
I talk very candidly to people about acknowledging where you are in the journey and having appreciation for it because 6 hours out is very different from 6 weeks out, from 6 months out, from 6 years out. So knowing and remembering and appreciating where you were at that 6 week mark and being able to go back and look at it and have pride and find strength and resilience in that continued forward momentum, I think is so crucial to that healing journey. So I love that capacity to have it tangibly on paper. And it's a checkpoint for yourself, like you said, that milestone. And I also think that writing lists and things down is just super helpful in general. We talk about the grief brain and how it affects who you are, how you feel. And you may have a very intense grief episode and then suffer from a short-term memory blockage of it, where your brain tries to protect you from how severe that grief was. And being able to look back and say, oh, this triggered me and it was really bad. How do I prepare differently next time? And maybe it won't be quite such a big wave. Do you find yourself flipping back through some of your journalings or your letters and rereading them? And does it bring you comfort, or does it give you capacity for wanting change, or how do you
Um,
use it for forward momentum?
I definitely look back sometimes, but I don't know that it necessarily brings either of those emotions. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my dog. He's going crazy right now.
Oh,
Um, what was where I was going with this? Oh, so sometimes I would look back at my journals and something that seemed so like bad and or sad or frustrating at the time, I look back and I read it and I'm like, that really wasn't as much of a big deal as I made it out to be in that moment. But again, that gives that perspective. And so you can, the next time you have one of those moments, you can be like, well, that's last time I felt this way and it ended up not being so bad after all. So
mm,
it's again that like mindset shift and perspective that comes from it and the looking back.
I love that. Yeah, it's a definite way of keeping you grounded, per se. At least for me, I find that when I do get stuff on paper, I'm able to ground myself to what's real and what's not. That fear of unknown or of the fear of things happening to you, it is all very intangible. So I love the idea of just bringing it out of your head and into the real world on paper. What are some other ways besides journaling that you cope with fears after experiencing a loss?
I lean on my people. So I go to different people for different things. So if depending on how I'm feeling, I may go to my mom or I may go to my best friend or I may go to TikTok and just talk into like the void of putting things out into social media because again, no advice coming back except for maybe in the comments, you know.
So you
But
gotta check the comment section.
yeah, so sometimes I don't want to talk to someone necessarily that knows me and because I don't know if you could tell this by now, but I'm really not into the unsolicited advice. Usually, if I'm venting about something, I have thought about it in every which way possible. And so, whatever advice you're giving me, I'm probably just like secretly rolling my eyes, like, yes, thank you. That wasn't helpful, but I appreciate the thought.
I don't have the
Sometimes
capacity
just the
to speak to
videos helps.
guys. My face doesn't allow that to happen.
Yeah, honestly, me neither. But
So I've
yeah,
been told I should not play poker.
I can relate. I can relate.
Oh, the struggle is real sometimes. My face just outs me left and right.
I also am like really into reading now, and I was always kind of a reader, but more so now because I feel like that gives me an escape. Like instead of being so focused on myself and what's going on with me, I get to like be in someone else's story for a minute and like let that captivate my thoughts.
I love that. You talk about taking vacations, and now you talk about like transporting yourself into other worlds by reading. You very much are a sensory experiencer, aren't you? You find those distractions that are completely immersive, and you
Yes.
completely you jump
Yes.
in
'Cause
both
I
the
feel
stories,
like
get your
I
feelings
know
out.
I have battled with intrusive thoughts for forever. So I know what it's like for me to just, I used to have to drive like 45 minutes to work every day and my brain would just go a million miles an hour. And so I have to like consciously like tell my brain to shut up. Like sometimes I will literally just out loud be like, enough, we're done talking about this. Like I have to shift my focus intentionally. So if I can do that in a nice way by opening a book instead and focusing on something else, I'm absolutely going to do that. I
Being a little
love
bit.
going on vacation and escaping my life for a week.
Oh yeah, yeah. What's the favorite vacation you've taken?
Last year I went to Ireland and Scotland. That was on one of those solo trip tours, and it was incredible. I was like, I need to find something that just shows me that life is out there and it's amazing. And so, like, I went to the Cliffs of Moher, and like, how can you stand there and not think like how beautiful life is, even though this dark, horrible thing happened to me? So
Mm.
that was like a really eye-opening, like breathing life back into myself kind of trip. And I'm actually going on another one of those trips at the end of this month. I'm going to Portugal, and I'm super excited about that.
Wow, you've never been to Portugal before?
Never.
Oh, I can't wait for the report back from you. I'm so excited for you. I
I know.
think
I
that
keep saying, I want to go tomorrow. I don't want to wait.
not yet. You got to wait. No, I think traveling is a really great way to move through fear. I know when I went to Paris back in October, like there was a huge fear associated with it. It was the fear of never having traveled outside the country and what to expect, and will I be able to navigate a foreign country, and what if my luggage gets lost, and what if my passport doesn't work for some reason, all of those
Yeah.
weird anxieties. But then when you get to the other side of it, you planned this trip, you put this trip together, and then you went and you did it, and there's something so fulfilling about that accomplishment. Maybe I'm weird like that. Most people don't look at trips as accomplishments, but for me, it was a big deal post loss to have that self navigated thing that I did all by my own, all on my own.
And
So I'm
it's also definitely taught me that I never have to be alone. So going from living with someone every day to going to living by myself is very lonely, right?
mm,
So I found that now I can go on these trips and I will go stay in a hostel, which I think we as Americans in our culture, we think that's a scary thing. There's like movies about you getting murdered in the hostel and whatever, but it's
rock
such
kind
a
of
like
ruined
fun
concept.
and inviting atmosphere.
Yeah.
And so when I go to Portugal, I'm actually for my first night, because I'm getting there a night before my trip starts, I'm staying in a hostel. And part of the beauty of that is you kind of have all these built-in people to chat with. And the
Mm-hmm.
hostels like put on they have a pub crawl that you can go on with all your hostel mates. And in the morning, there's a walking tour that you can go on with all these people because they're all individuals doing the same thing. So instead of being in a hotel and being sad about, oh, I'm lonely in this hotel by myself, I wish my person was here, I can surround myself with other humans and not be as lonely.
And for the classic textbook introvert who's now a pro extrovert, that is such a wild place to find yourself. I'm sure there's perspective in that and appreciation in that growth as well.
1,000,000%. Every time me and my mom talk about it, she's like, how did you become a hostel girl? Like that little girl that I raised was like terrified of everything. And now you're going to sleep in a room with strangers. I'm like, yeah, I don't know how this happened, but it's exciting. It's fun.
Yeah, I think yeah, that is the beauty in the experience that we've had, and tragic and unfortunate as all of our losses have been. Sometimes we find those pieces of ourselves that we wouldn't have uncovered otherwise as a result of that byproduct. And so there becomes a moment of gratitude in the sadness and in the loss and in the grief.
Yeah.
Um,
And
well,
I think that John's personality and being with him taught me a lot about people not being scary. So
mm,
like we a lot of us have such bad social anxiety now, and I don't know if it's a COVID thing or if it's a social media thing, but like we're scared of people.
mm,
And we shouldn't be. Like he used to just go chat with the person in the grocery line or chat with anybody.
I feel
Now
like
I do
people,
that and I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm becoming him."
it's funny. Yeah, I think that peopling can be exhausting, especially for the neurodivergent. Like to just have to maintain peopling is hard some days, and for you to just take that piece of him and integrate it into your life and lean into it, it's such a beautiful way to pay tribute to John. So I love that you do that, and I love that it works for you. Um, yeah, so tell the listeners where they can find your journals if they want to be as awesome as you are and journal and move that grief through their bodies. Where can they find your stuff?
So I am on all the social media. You can find me on Facebook and TikTok, Heartstrings Journals, also Instagram, heart_strings journals. And from any of those platforms, you can get to my link tree, which is going to have my link to my Amazon shop. There's got to be upwards of 50 journals on Amazon now that I have easy. You can get your 2-day prime shipping. You can
Love
read my
that.
little bio about me and my story if you want to know more about me. But yeah, social media and Instagram and Facebook, I post journal prompts as well. So you don't necessarily have to use um, the format of my journal. You can have a blank journal and get your journal prompts right off my social media.
I love that. You sell the blank journals as well. So
Yes.
go ahead and grab yourself a blank journal and follow her on social media to get your daily prompts. I think she's a one-stop shop for journaling and processing fears and grief. Do you have anything in person locally coming up for those who are near the Connecticut area?
I tend to like to go to breweries. So any brewery that's having a vendor event, I will be at Illicit Brewery in Manchester at some point. I will be at Powder Hollow Brewery, which is in Enfield. I post all that stuff on my Instagram as well, so you can always see where I am. I pretty much have something every weekend. So you can always find me.
I love that. I love that. Well, make sure for those of you who are local to the area, you get out and you find Shawn and introduce yourself to her now that she's a pro extrovert and make friends with her. And I just want to thank you for hopping on in a last minute podcast rescue. She came to my rescue this morning, so super appreciate it. If you could give the listeners one piece of advice, or maybe even a journal prompt, give them a little freebie, what would you say to the listeners who are processing spousal loss?
So, like I talk a lot about mindset, it's not something that I think necessarily comes natural. I put a lot of work and focus onto shifting my mindset. And so I like to tell people, like, we think that whatever our brain says is what goes, but you can also tell your brain what you want it to think. And if you practice that and you go in that direction, trying to consciously shift your focus, it will become more natural. So your thought patterns will go that way the more that you practice. Just like if you were doing a sport, the more you practice, the better you're going to get at it. So I think just being aware of putting in the work and not just attributing it to like my personality is why I think that way. It takes work to shift that mindset into a more positive space. So put in the work and you will find yourself in a better place.
I love that. I love it. It's a very like tangible, practical piece of advice. So thank you so much, Shawn, for joining me today and for sharing your wisdom and your fears. And I want to thank everyone out there for listening to the Happily Never After show. Please be sure to hop on to the Exvadio Media Network and listen to some of our previous episodes. And stay tuned for all of our future content as we start to roll out some pretty exciting stuff. Shawn's going to be a part of the book that I'm also co-authoring, Faces of Grief, with Samantha Ruth. And I think you've got the Grief Hab conference coming up in August that she's doing. And I think you guys are going to phone into my August professional development conference for a book panel that day too. So
yeah, the next part of my life is just bouncing around from Connecticut to Colorado.
Hey man, that's not
Between
a bad
you and
life.
Sam, you guys keep me busy.
I'm here to help. That's what and shout out to Sam Ruth. We love her. She is the reason, or Shawn's the reason that Sam and I know each other, and the three of us have kind of just really run forward with all of the things that we're working on. So shout out to Sam Ruth and Grief Hab, and thanks everyone for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode.
You've been listening to Happily Never After, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode of Happily Never After, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.